They built it to worship glory, but Versailles demanded blood in return. There are places so beautiful they seem touched by the divine, and yet, beneath their perfection something festers, an ancient whisper of arrogance, betrayal, and death. The Palace of Versailles was meant to be the beating heart of French glory. Instead, it became a gilded tomb, a monument cursed by the very kings who built it. From its golden gates to its hall of mirrors, Versailles witnessed it all: ambition, madness, revolution, and the downfall of every monarch who dared call it home. This is not just the story of a palace. It's the story of how one dream, born in vanity, devoured a dynasty. This is the curse of Versailles. Louis XIV was barely 23 when he declared himself the living embodiment of France, the Sun King. His power was absolute, his will unshakable, and his ego unmatched. He wanted a palace so grand that even God himself might envy it. So he chose a quiet hunting lodge in the marshes of Versailles and turned it into a golden world. For 40 years he built, 40 years of endless halls, shimmering mirrors and gardens that stretched like dreams. But the land resisted him. It was swampy, diseased, and damp. Thousands of workers died, their bodies buried beneath the marble they set in place. Some said their souls never left, that their whispers could be heard at night when the fountains ceased to sing. Louis ignored the warning. He believed he was chosen by the heavens, that Versailles was his divine stage. But with each brick laid, something darker stirred beneath the foundations. A debt to fate that no king could ever repay. By 1682, Versailles was no longer just a palace. It was the center of the world. Louis forced the entire French court to live there under his watchful gaze. Every smile, every whisper, every breath, choreographed for his amusement. But absolute power is a fragile thing. And behind the mirrors, resentment festered. The nobles, trapped in this golden cage, began to scheme. The servants whispered about shadows moving through the corridors at night, faces reflected in mirrors that weren't their own. Even the king grew paranoid. He ordered the halls blessed weekly. Priests walked the corridors, sprinkling holy water on walls that already dripped with guilt. Some say the first curse of Versailles began here, in Louis's fear of losing control. Because no man, not even a Sun King, can play God forever. The Sun King's favorite mistress, Madame de Montespan, was beautiful, powerful, and desperate. To keep the king's love, she turned to forbidden magic. Love potions, charms, and, according to rumor, human blood. The affair of the poisons shook the kingdom. When the royal investigators uncovered evidence of dark rituals in Paris and connections to Montespan, panic spread through the palace. Witnesses claimed that sacrifices were made in her name, and that during one unholy ritual a priest uttered a curse. The palace of kings shall know no peace. Their bloodline shall end in shame and fire. Louis silenced the scandal, but he could not silence fate. From that moment on, the Sun King's fortunes began to dim. His heirs died young. His queen grew sickly. His body decayed while his palace gleamed brighter than ever. Versailles had taken its first offering. In the final years of his life, Louis wandered his palace like a ghost. He could no longer stand the light that once symbolized his glory. Mirrors reflected only his decay. Every echo reminded him of the men who had died to build his dream. And every death in his family, every child, every heir, felt like another brick in a tomb he could not escape. When he died in 1715, the courtiers whispered that the air in the palace turned cold, that the candles refused to burn near his Bourbon seen close-up on dying king's eyes. Do not build upon the bones of men, but it was too late. The curse had already taken root. The boy king inherited not just the throne, but the ghosts of Versailles. And soon the whispers began again. As he grew older, Louis XV felt an unshakable dread within the palace. He avoided certain corridors. He claimed the mirrors distorted his reflection. Even his mistresses refused to sleep near the Hall of Mirrors, saying they heard footsteps long after midnight. But history repeated itself. Like his great-grandfather, Louis XV filled the palace with opulence and sin, and once again Versailles demanded payment. In 1752, a maid claimed to have seen the ghost of Louis XIV wandering the upper galleries, his face veiled in shadow. Days later, the maid vanished without a trace. Rumors spread through the court, of phantom music echoing from empty halls. of mirrors fogging without breath, of apparitions in royal chambers. The king ordered silence, but he could not silence the curse. Each generation tried to rule the palace, but in truth, Versailles ruled them. When Marie Antoinette arrived at Versailles, she was only 14. She thought she was entering a fairy tale, but what awaited her was a ghost story centuries in the making. The whispers were stronger than ever. The mirrors reflected more than faces. They reflected fate. Old servants warned her to never look too long into the glass of the Hall of Mirrors. For those who did, it was said, saw their own death. Marie laughed at the superstition, but laughter dies easily in a cursed place, and soon, Versailles would taste royal blood once again. By the time Marie Antoinette became queen, Versailles was already a relic, a palace gilded in decay. Its walls glittered, but its heart was hollow. The people of France starved while their rulers danced. The Sun King's dream had curdled into arrogance, and the curse, dormant for decades, began to stir once more. Marie hated the suffocating pomp of court life. So she fled to the gardens and building her own world, a false village called the Petit Trianon, where she played the role of a shepherdess. But even there, the whispers followed. At night, she claimed to hear footsteps in her chambers. Doors creaked open on their own, and once, as she gazed into her mirror, she swore she saw not her reflection, but the guillotine's blade glinting behind her. Her ladies dismissed it as nerves. But those who worked the night shifts spoke of ghostly figures gliding through the corridors, dressed in fashions long out of date. Some said the Sun King himself had returned to collect what was owed. There's a story, half legend, half truth, that 1 year before the Revolution, Marie Antoinette encountered something unexplainable in the gardens of Versailles. She was walking near the Temple of Love when time seemed to stop. The air thickened, the sky turned pale, and before her stood figures, dressed in powdered wigs and torn lace, their faces gray, their eyes empty. One figure, a woman veiled in black, whispered, "Leave this place, for the curse will claim your head." Marie ran trembling back to the palace, but no one believed her. The following year, the revolution began. October 5th, 1789. The people of Paris marched to Versailles, thousands strong, drenched in rain, driven by hunger and rage. They demanded bread. They demanded justice. And as the palace doors burst open, history and horror became one. The guards were slaughtered. The queen's bed was torn apart. The golden mirrors reflected not beauty, but chaos, the curse fulfilling its promise. Marie and Louis XVI were dragged from their gilded cage, forced to face the city they had ignored. Versailles was left behind, silent, dark, and hollow. Scene: wind howls through the empty hall of mirrors. Voiceover: the ghosts of the kings lingered in the silence. The mirrors cracked, and the palace began to die. The king was the first to fall. Louis XVI, descendant of the Sun King, faced his people with trembling lips. When the blade fell, it was said that thunder echoed over Versailles, though the sky above Paris was clear. 9 months later, Marie Antoinette followed him to the scaffold. She climbed the steps with ghostly calm, her once white hair turned silver. As the blade rose, witnesses claimed she whispered something only the wind could hear. "Versailles, I am coming home." And when the blade struck, it said that the great mirrors of the palace cracked. Every one of them, a palace born in glory, had become a graveyard of kings. For years after the revolution, Versailles was abandoned, a rotting monument to a dead monarchy. The fountains dried, the gardens withered, only the echoes remained. Soldiers stationed there spoke of cold drafts, of laughter in empty halls, of candlelight flickering in locked rooms. Some refused to sleep inside the palace. Others swore they saw a woman in white gliding through the Hall of Mirrors, her neck marked with blood. And though history called it superstition, the legends of Versailles only grew darker. When Napoleon rose to power, he visited Versailles, hoping to claim the ghosts of the kings as his own. But even he, the conqueror of Europe, felt the weight of its silence. He restored a few rooms, and then abruptly left, refusing to sleep within the palace walls. His advisors claimed it was politics, but his guards told another story. They said the emperor was found pacing the Hall of Mirrors at dawn, whispering, "They are watching me." He never returned. In 1837, a new king tried to break the curse. Louis-Philippe declared Versailles a museum of French history, a place for all people, not just royalty. But even this attempt at redemption could not silence the whispers. Visitors reported sudden chills, footsteps in empty galleries, and reflections that did not move when they did. One night, a caretaker discovered the portraits of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette had fallen from the walls. At exactly the same moment, a thunderstorm struck Paris. Coincidence? Or reminder? In August 1901, two school teachers, Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, claimed they experienced something impossible. While walking near the Petit Trianon, the air suddenly changed. The light dimmed, and they found themselves surrounded by people in 18th century dress. They saw Marie Antoinette sketching quietly under a tree, though she had been dead for more than a century. When they blinked, the scene was gone. Only the ruins of the Trianon remained. Their story, published as an adventure, became one of the most famous paranormal cases in history. Skeptics called it fantasy, but believers said the curse had simply opened a door, showing the past still trapped in Versailles. Even now, centuries later, Versailles remains haunted, not just by ghosts, but by memory. Guards still report lights turning on in sealed rooms. Visitors have fainted, claiming they felt hands on their shoulders when no one was there. Security cameras have captured shadows moving against the mirrors, shadows with no source. During night tours, guides tell the old stories in hushed tones, that the Sun King still walks his halls at midnight, that the Queen watches from her balcony, forever waiting for her children, and that the palace, even in silence, still hungers for kings. Versailles stands today as one of the most beautiful places on earth, but beauty here has always come at a price. It is a palace built on bones, a monument to vanity, power, and downfall. The kings who built it sought immortality, and they found it, not in glory, but in haunting. For every mirror reflects their fate, every corridor echoes their sins, and every sunrise over the golden gates reminds the world that pride has a cost. The Curse of Versailles is not just a ghost story. It's a warning, because when humans try to build eternity on the suffering of others, something eternal always answers back. Listen closely. Can you hear it? The laughter of kings, the footsteps of ghosts, the echo of a curse that never died. Versailles may stand forever, but so will the shadow it cast. The palace that killed its own kings still waits for the next one.